what if one of the greatest military failures in American history, became the foundation for one of the most capable special operations forces ever assembled. History is full of victories that changed nations, but sometimes failure leaves the deeper legacy. Sometimes a disaster exposes weaknesses that success would have hidden. In rare moments, those lessons reshape an entire military for generations. One such moment unfolded in the spring of 1980. An operation intended to rescue American hostages from Iran ended in tragedy deep inside the Iranian desert. The mission failed. 8 American servicemen lost their lives. The hostages remained in captivity. Around the world, the operation was widely viewed as a major setback for the United States. Yet many military historians argue that its long-term consequences proved far more significant than the operation itself. To understand why, we first need to go back to the events that created the crisis. In 1979, Iran experienced one of the most dramatic political transformations in its modern history. The government led by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi collapsed during the Iranian Revolution. The new Islamic Republic emerged under the leadership of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. For decades before the revolution, Iran had been one of Washington's closest regional partners. Almost overnight, that strategic relationship disappeared. Political distrust rapidly intensified. When the former Shah was later allowed to enter the United States for medical treatment, many revolutionary groups inside Iran viewed the decision as proof that Washington still supported the previous government. Soon afterward, protesters occupied the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Dozens of American diplomats and embassy personnel were taken hostage. What initially appeared to many observers as a short political confrontation soon evolved into one of the longest hostage crises in modern diplomatic history. For months, negotiations continued through multiple diplomatic channels. International mediators attempted to find a peaceful solution. Public pressure inside the United States steadily increased as the crisis dragged on. Television coverage brought the hostage situation into millions of American homes every evening. The issue became both a diplomatic challenge and a national test of credibility. Eventually, military planners were asked to evaluate another option. Could the hostages be rescued by force? On paper, the concept appeared possible. In reality, it would become one of the most complicated special operations ever attempted at that time. The mission required aircraft from multiple military branches, helicopters operating from the sea, transport aircraft arriving from distant bases, ground forces conducting a rescue inside a heavily populated capital city, extraction flights leaving before dawn. Every stage depended upon the previous one succeeding almost perfectly. Looking back today, many analysts believe the greatest obstacle was not geography. It was organization. At the beginning of the 1980s, America's armed services were highly capable within their own individual specialties. But large-scale joint special operations remained relatively undeveloped. Each branch maintained its own command structure, its own communication systems, its own planning methods, its own operational procedures. Cooperation certainly existed. A true joint integration was still evolving. Today, unified command centers, common communications, and integrated planning are taken for granted. At the time, many of those systems either did not exist or were still in their infancy. That meant every complicated mission required extraordinary coordination, and every additional moving part increased the possibility of failure. Meanwhile, another organization was quietly beginning its own journey. Only a short time earlier, the U.S. Army had activated a new unit dedicated to counterterrorism and hostage rescue. It would later become famous around the world. But during those early months, it had very little operational experience. Its personnel were exceptionally trained. Its mission was ambitious. Yet the organization itself was still new. Its first major test would arrive far sooner than anyone expected. The rescue plan that emerged demanded extraordinary precision. Aircraft would launch from multiple locations, rendezvous deep inside remote desert terrain, refuel under cover of darkness, continue toward temporary staging areas, remain hidden throughout the following day, then move into Tehran before launching simultaneous rescue operations. Every phase relied upon precise timing, weather, navigation, mechanical reliability, communications, human judgment. If any one element failed, the entire sequence could begin to unravel. Military planning often describes these operations as complex systems, not because any individual task is impossible, but because success depends on every interconnected part functioning together. In hindsight, that complexity became one of the mission's greatest vulnerabilities. As the operation unfolded, unexpected challenges began appearing almost immediately. Mechanical issues affected some aircraft. Environmental conditions proved more severe than anticipated. Visibility deteriorated. Formation flying became increasingly difficult. Navigation grew more complicated than planners had expected. Each individual problem appeared manageable, Together, they steadily reduced the operation's margin for success. Military historians frequently note that major failures rarely result from a single mistake. Instead, they emerge when numerous small difficulties begin interacting with one another. That pattern would become painfully clear during this mission. Eventually, commanders reached a critical decision point. The operation required a minimum number of mission-capable aircraft to continue safely. Once that threshold could no longer be met, leaders determined that the rescue should be aborted. At that moment, the objective shifted from completing the mission to bringing everyone home safely. Unfortunately, the most tragic moments were still ahead. During preparations to depart the desert staging area, an accident involving aircraft on the ground triggered a catastrophic fire. The explosion destroyed multiple aircraft. 8 American servicemen were killed. Several others were injured. The remaining personnel evacuated before additional danger developed. The rescue mission had ended. The hostages remained in Iran. And the United States faced one of the most painful military setbacks of the modern era. Around the world, governments drew their own conclusions. Some questioned American military capability. Others viewed the failure as evidence that highly complex hostage rescue operations were simply too risky to execute successfully. Inside the Pentagon, however, a very different conversation had already begun. Rather than asking only what went wrong, military leaders started asking a much more important question. How could this never happen again? But the most important lesson was not about helicopters. It was not about sandstorms. And it was not even about the hostage rescue itself. It was about organization. Military historians have spent decades studying Operation Eagle Claw, and many have reached a similar conclusion. The mission did not fail because American troops lacked courage. It failed because an extraordinarily difficult operation demanded a level of joint coordination that simply did not exist at the time. Different services trained separately. Different commanders made decisions through different chains of authority. Equipment, communications, logistics, and planning all had to be stitched together for a single mission, leaving little margin for error. The result became one of the most influential case studies in modern military reform. Within months, reviews began examining every stage of the operation. What emerged was not an effort to assign blame to individuals, but a recognition that the structure itself needed to change. The United States began building something entirely different. Instead of independent organizations working side by side, the goal became permanent joint integration. Special operations units would train together, plan together, deploy together. Communications would be standardized. Command relationships would be simplified. Logistics would be designed around one mission instead of several separate services. In many ways, Desert One became less a failed rescue mission than the blueprint for a new military architecture. Throughout the 1980s, those reforms continued. Joint command structures expanded. Special operations aviation received dedicated investment. New doctrine emphasized interoperability instead of competition. Perhaps most importantly, future missions would no longer be assembled from temporary organizations created only for a single operation. Permanent headquarters, specialized aviation, intelligence integration, and mission planning all became part of a long-term system. The changes were gradual, but together they transformed how complex operations were conducted. By the time the United States entered the post-Cold War era, that transformation was becoming visible. Operations increasingly relied on small, highly trained teams supported by real-time intelligence, precision aviation, and integrated communications. Instead of relying purely on numbers, success depended on coordination. Every aircraft, every satellite, every intelligence analyst, every operator, working from the same operational picture. That philosophy continued evolving through the following decades. Technological advances accelerated the process. Digital communications replaced many of the fragmented systems of earlier years. Precision navigation dramatically improved long-range infiltration. Night-vision equipment became more capable. Unmanned aircraft expanded surveillance. Space-based intelligence shortened the time between collecting information and acting upon it. Each improvement addressed a weakness that planners had identified years earlier. None of these changes appeared overnight. They accumulated slowly, lesson after lesson, exercise after exercise, operation after operation. That may be the most remarkable part of this story. Many nations experience military setbacks. Far fewer completely redesign how they prepare for future conflicts. The reforms that followed Desert One reached far beyond one rescue mission. They influenced doctrine, procurement, command relationships, training standards, and professional military education. Even officers who entered service decades later were still learning lessons rooted in that night in the Iranian desert. Today, military academies around the world continue studying Operation Eagle Claw, not because it represents tactical success, but because it demonstrates how organizational weaknesses can become operational failures. It also illustrates something equally important. Failure sometimes produces reforms that victories never would. Victory often reinforces existing assumptions. Failure forces uncomfortable questions. Why did this happen? What assumptions proved wrong? What must change before the next crisis arrives? Those questions shaped decades of American defense planning, and they remain relevant today. Modern warfare has become increasingly dependent on coordination across multiple domains: land, sea, air, space, information. No single service can operate independently for long. Success depends on integrating all of them into one coherent system. That principle, now taken for granted by many militaries, was reinforced by experiences like Desert One. The story also carries a broader strategic lesson. Military power is not measured only by the number of aircraft, ships, or armored vehicles a country possesses. It is also measured by how effectively those capabilities are connected. A technologically advanced force with poor coordination can struggle. A well-integrated force can often achieve far more than the sum of its individual parts. That lesson extends beyond the battlefield. Large organizations, whether military, governmental, or commercial, often succeed or fail based on communication, leadership, and institutional learning. Technology matters. Training matters. But the ability to learn from failure may matter most of all. Looking back more than 4 decades later, historians continue debating many aspects of Operation Eagle Claw. Some focus on intelligence. Others emphasize logistics. Some examine political decision-making. Others analyze aviation planning. But nearly everyone agrees on one point. The operation marked a turning point. Its immediate objective was never achieved. Yet its long-term influence on American military organization proved profound. History is full of moments like this. Events that appear to be endings become beginnings instead. Disasters become catalysts. Defeats become classrooms. The consequences unfold not over days or weeks, but across generations. That is why Operation Eagle Claw continues to attract attention long after the hostage crisis ended. It is no longer remembered solely as a rescue attempt. It is remembered as a case study in institutional adaptation, a reminder that military effectiveness depends not only on equipment or personnel, but on the willingness to examine failure honestly and improve because of it. Perhaps that is the enduring legacy of that night. Not the helicopters, not the desert, not even the mission itself, but the realization that lasting strength often comes from an organization's ability to learn faster than the challenges it faces. History rarely offers perfect victories. Sometimes its greatest lessons begin with failure, and those lessons continue shaping military strategy to this day.